everyone, and welcome to Calvary Conversations. I am Joshua Paxton, Director of the Burnham Center for Global Engagement at Calvary University. With me today is Dr. Marvin J. Newell, Calvary class of 1974, and he is staff missiologist at Missio Nexus and also Executive Director of the Alliance for the Unreached. Previously, he served as a missionary in Papua, Indonesia, a mission administrator, a professor of missions, director of a missions association, the IFMA, and senior vice president of Missio Nexus. He is the author of 4 mission-related books and has another coming out in August. Additionally, he is the general editor of the Evangelical Missions Quarterly. So if there is an individual who knows a little bit about missions, I think Dr. Newell fits the bill. So our topic for today, for our conversation, is what mega changes have taken place over the past 42 years in missions. Dr. Newell has been involved in missions for 42 years, and so we're going to be talking about some of the things that he has seen change in the realm of missions over the past 42 years. And so let me begin by listing them off for you, and then I am going to ask Dr. Newell to expound on them. So from church, 70% in the West, it is primarily in the West, white and rich, to now the church being 70% non-Western. It is everywhere, people of color, the poor. That's number one. Number two, from Western mission dominance to majority world mission dominance. Number three, from country focus, being focused on reaching specific countries, to now being focused on people groups. And then number four, from specific locales to reaching migrants, refugees, especially from restricted locations, restricted access countries. From traditional church planting to business as missions. From church growth movements to church planting movements to now disciple-making movements. Yes, I love teaching. I love teaching the history of missions. Everybody's got their movement. From spiritually, emotionally, hardy, robust missionaries to fragile, distracted missionaries, and we have seen an explosion of member care. From competition to organizational collaboration, and then the explosion of short-term missions and cyber missions, something a little bit new with issues that we have faced lately. So thank you for being with us today, Dr. Newell.
Well, listen, Josh, it's a privilege to be here. You know, I still remember back in 1974 when I graduated from Calvary. Calvary at that time was in downtown Kansas City, just on the western side of the city, if you recall. So you now have a beautiful campus out there, you know, just outside the suburbs. And so things have changed a lot over 40 years at Calvary. From 1974, and then in 78, my wife and I went overseas for the first time. So that was 42 years ago. And that was quite a list you just read off that we're going to work our way through. But these are the changes that have transpired in the world of missions that I love to share with your listeners today.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, and Calvary has experienced a lot of changes in that time. So we, just this past year, we celebrated our president's dinner at that old campus where you would have graduated from. So
yes.
I should also throw in there for everyone that Dr. Newell is the second reader on my dissertation, so I need to behave today. All right, so from church being 70% in the West to now church being 70% non-Western. What does that mean? Maybe you could expound on each one of these for us.
Boy, it means a real lot, Josh. Actually, in 1970, it was documented 70% of not only the church, but evangelicals in the world were here in the West, North America, the North Atlantic countries, you know, Western Europe and that area there. And that was the makeup. And quite frankly, the church was dominantly white, rich, and West is what we called it. And that's the big picture of it. Well, now, because of the explosion of the church in other parts of the world, not necessarily to decrease here in the West. It's been about the same or stable numbers here, but because of the explosion of church growth all around the world in the non-Western world, now we've seen this just absolutely reversed. 70% of the church is what we call the majority world church, or some people call it the Southern church, whatever you want to call it. And it can be characterized as South, poor, and of color. And that's the majority. And so now a lot of our theology is coming out of that church, a lot of our missionaries, and our second point is going to show that. And so the influence of the church from that part of the world is now the greatest influence of the church globally.
Yes, I have two books back here on my shelf. One of them is African theology, and the other one is Asian theology.
Yes, right.
Haven't been able to read them yet, but I'm looking forward to it. So,
right. And it's really interesting, Josh, when you read those theologies, that their perspective of scripture from their cultural background is not wrong. It's just a little bit different from us, and they can give us insights. And so there's really good material there.
Yeah, it's not that it's wrong or heretical or anything like that. It's just their culture gives them a different insight that we might be blinded to because of
exactly right. And that's why these are rich theologies for us in our part of the world as well.
Yeah, and so we used to say that missions is from the West to the rest, and now it is everywhere to everywhere. So.
Yes.
So yeah, the second point was from Western mission dominance to majority world mission dominance.
And just like you just said, Josh, from everywhere to everywhere is now really the way missions is going. Instead of Western missionaries getting on boats or airplanes and flying to the other parts of the world, we're finding that, Josh, when you put all the missionaries from North America and Europe together, there's about 50,000 evangelical missionaries in the world. When you take the missionaries from all the other countries now that we call the majority world, it's well over 100,000. And so it's twice as many missionaries coming from that part of the world as there is from our part of the world. And they do missions differently than what we do. I mean, there are those that do it like us with agencies and raising support and those kinds of things. And there's many that are very much church directed and church sent from that part of the world. Probably the majority of them are. So it's a model that's different, but there's many of them out there. And some people call it the missions traffic jam, not because there's too many, but because everyone seems to be kind of, bottled up doing different things. And so we find that we're just so thankful that these brothers and sisters from the rest of the world are now bearing the blunt of the battle, you might say, for missions in the world today.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things that I like to share with my students, the U.S. Center for World Missions, does a lot of studies and they put out a lot of information. And I think it was the 2010 issue that shared that the United States not only sends the most in terms of numbers, but we also receive the most missionaries from other countries.
That's exactly right. And it really is. And maybe some of our listeners have seen some of these or met some of these missionaries from other countries. They're certainly there in our midst and in our communities. And so, they are here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so number 3, so from being focused on countries, and so, maybe some of our listeners and, you and I are familiar with Operation World, where you can go online and you can look up stats on countries and everything. And so that was kind of where missions was focused on, let's reach this country, to now more of a focus on people groups. Maybe you could explain what is a people group and why has mission shifted that way?
Yeah, a really good example of this is the country of Vietnam. I like to use that country because it makes it so clear. And that is this: 70% of the people in Vietnam are the Viet people, who are the major majority people there. But there are other ethnic groups there, ethno-linguistic groups that are in pockets in that country that have yet to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. And actually, that country has about 120 ethno-linguistic groups. And of those, 67 are considered unreached, just no access to the gospel whatsoever. And so you got not just the Hmong that a lot of people might know about, but you have the Dai people, the red Dai, the black Dai, and so forth. And all these people, maybe there's 50,000, maybe there's 100,000 that are in these clusters that need to be reached. And so, yeah, it might be true that the church is already in Vietnam. It is true. I've been in their churches in Saigon and other areas. But the country is not reached because so many of the people groups within that country are not reached yet with the gospel. They don't have a Bible in their language. They don't have churches, and there's no believers. And so the three no's are very evident in these pockets that we call unreached people groups.
Yes. So yeah, you might see a statistic that says something. I'm just pulling this out of the air. Maybe it says something like Vietnam is, I don't know, 40% reached. And so a lot of people might see that and be like, well, we don't need to send missionaries to Vietnam anymore. It was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Now, you have to understand there's still whole people with unique culture, unique language that have no access to the gospel. So
Exactly right. Yeah. And that's why, you know, some Christians in the pew might be confused. Why are we still sending missionaries to, say, Vietnam or to Thailand or to Indonesia? There's already been churches there. It's because of this very reason that the
yes.
gospel hasn't penetrated deeply into the ethnic groups that are there that still remain unreached.
You know, this seems like this is a good point in our conversation. So you are the executive director for the Alliance for the Unreached. Maybe you could tell our listeners, what is that?
Yeah, you know, there's been a groundswell of organizations, about 50 of them, and Avant is one, which you happen to be a member of, that
Yep.
have banded together to make sure that we don't lose sight of the emphasis of reaching unreached peoples. People with no access to the gospel. This is what we're saying. They don't have access to the gospel. Not that they're unsaved. I mean, there's a lot of unsaved people even in your community where everyone is.
Sure.
But we're talking about people that don't even know that there's a Jesus to believe in. They are unaccessed and altogether when it comes to knowing the gospel message. And so this group, the Alliance for the Unreached, is out promoting this need in our churches. And we've come up with this kind of a brand that we called A Third of Us. And it's like three lines together like this, and one's a little bit separated. A third of humanity still does not have access to the gospel. And so we want to send, it's about 3 billion people. We want to send gospel messengers to those 3 billion that still have yet to have access to the gospel.
Yeah, it's just about almost 8 billion people in the world today, and 3 billion of them never even heard of Jesus's name.
That's right.
So from specific locales, or having a focus on specific locations, to reaching migrants, refugees, especially from restricted access countries. What does that mean?
Yeah, this is a beautiful thing, actually, Josh. You know, with people becoming refugees or migrating all throughout history, people have been pushing and shoving themselves around different locales, and some people, unfortunately, become refugees, especially as we know the great influx of people from North Africa, Middle East, into Europe, and so forth. And now these people are right in our doorsteps, and we're able to reach them there. So no longer do we necessarily need to send, say, missionaries to a community in North Africa to reach an unreached people group. They might be right there in Kansas City, or they might be in New York or something. And many times missionaries that have worked overseas come back to the States for whatever reason, they can plug in and continue that ministry. They know the language, they know the culture, and they can plug in those communities here in the States or in Western Europe, wherever that happens to be, and reach them there. So the dividing walls of national blocks have really just disintegrated in the last 20 years, especially, Josh, in a way that fortunately churches see that and missionaries see that and are able now to reach these people as they're moving into our direction.
Yeah. In case anyone missed it, we have a previous episode where Tim Hange interviewed. Oh no, I'm sorry. Sean LePage interviewed Rich Casebolt, who is the director of Refuge KC, a ministry here in Kansas City, to immigrants, refugees, just people from all over who have found themselves in Kansas City. And you mentioned missionaries, former missionaries. He was a missionary in Thailand, and now he's started that ministry. So yes.
It makes all the sense in the world, doesn't it? I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
why come back from your country after you've spent all those years investing your life in that culture and whatever, and then take up a job at Menards or Home Depot, instead of just being able to do this? So thank the Lord for people like him.
Absolutely. So, and you talk about restricted access countries. Well, who knows that some of those folks won't be able to go home someday and take the gospel with them when we can't get there right now. So,
it's been determined that these people who are refugees like this here in our country, they talk on the cell phones with the people back in their country once a week at least. And therefore, they're able to, even right here while they're still here, to influence those people. So that's a big topic. I don't want to get stuck on this one, but
yeah,
it's a biggie.
We only have 10 minutes left. Yeah. So, all right. So from traditional church planting to business as missions, what is the shift there?
We don't need to spend a lot of time on this one, Josh, but we still do traditional church planting. That is absolutely at the core of what we are as missionaries. But to reach into some of these, especially restricted access countries where a missionary visa is forbidden or work is not, that's outrightly done, many now are just taking their jobs, whatever they are, their professions, maybe they're medical doctors, English teachers or whatever, and they're going overseas and have a paid job in a location and able to try to build churches or establish churches and be a witness in their community that way. So that's basically the gist of what we're calling business as mission. Some people call it missional business. It depends on what take you want to take on this. But very effective way. And obviously, tent makers are also called, and Paul did that. A great example would be him. So it really is a great way to supplement the larger church planting missionary movement that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, so as I teach, I mentioned this to you earlier, as I teach history of missions, it seems throughout the history of missions, everybody had their movement. We've got this movement and that movement. And so the next point was from the church growth movement to church planting movements to now disciple making movements. What's going on here?
Okay, when I was a student at Calvary, this is 40 some years ago, 45 years ago, we were all indoctrinated in the church growth movement by a guy named McGavran that came up with that. And the idea was that if you have churches already established in the area, help them to continue to grow and grow and grow because it's fertile ground. Mm-hmm. When I got into missions after a few years, they absolutely reversed it and said, no, what we need to do is plant churches in areas where there are no churches. We shouldn't focus on those already reached, but to the completely unreached. And so church planting movements of reaching the unreached hard places came up. And now, after that, kind of a part of that is disciple making movement, where you're going and you're trying to do little discipleship groups and have these little groups. And there's a way that especially it's been advocated to have non-believers meeting and studying scripture and having these little disciple groups. And this becomes a movement as well. So as we kind of penetrate even further deeper into unreached people groups. So these movements means more than just one, it means there's a cluster, there's a whole group, and there's momentum going on. And so we've seen these three shifts over the last 40 years.
Yeah. So, man, every single one of these we could do a whole 26-minute conversation.
I suggest you do that. Yeah.
So maybe we should. Yeah. Here's the introduction. Stay tuned. We'll do some others down the road. So yeah. So the next one and this is all right. This is kind of a big one. from spiritually, emotionally hardy, robust missionaries. And so you think about, Adoniram Judson, William Carey, those pioneers who went out and did it pretty much all by themselves, to fragile, distracted missionaries. And in that, we have seen, this explosion of member care, both from agencies and churches trying to be more intentional in taking care of their missionaries.
You are right. And you said this is a big one when you started this one out. And it's this, Josh, even you don't have to go all the way back to William Carey. Even the World War II generation that went as missionaries following the Second World War were very robust, hardy, spiritually strong people who were out there pioneering works all around the world. And they were just people of strong integrity and spirituality, and lived the life like they could. But, we're all products of our generations. And now the newer generation that's here, so many of them come from broken homes or from non-Christian homes, and they're trying to engage in missions. They carry some baggage with them. They have a lot of stuff going on in their lives that's distracting because of the internet being a distraction, where they can't fully focus on the ministry that they've been sent to do, and they have other concerns. And it's just very much a fragile type personality that we have out there. I talked to a leader of a mission just the other day. He says, last year we dismissed 18 couples from our mission because of things that could have been avoided that were personal matters. It just goes to show you, Josh, that things are really, really different than they were. And therefore, the growth of the member care movements, member care departments in different missions. Every mission has it now, because we seem to have to hold the hands of our missionaries much more than we did in the past.
Yeah. I hope that wasn't just recorded. I had something open on my computer over here and it started talking. I apologize if it was. So yeah, and this is not to say that there's anything like wrong with the current generation or anything like that. It's I teach a contemporary issues in missions class. And so one of the things that we talk about in that class is just the explosion of technology, like you have mentioned. And, so think about all the television streaming services that we have today. Everybody's got their whatever plus. Disney came out with something plus, and now everybody has their whatever plus. And so, but you send a missionary to a place like Europe, and how easy it is to use those things and stream that and everything. And there's nothing inherently necessarily wrong with that, but what it could do is prevent that missionary from engaging in the culture and being able to learn the culture and the language and really get in and be able to do effective ministry.
That's why we used the word earlier, a distraction. They become a distraction to the core task of what the missionary is sent to do, and people get really caught up in that and so deeply away that it has become a real concern for a lot of mission agencies. So yeah, it's just the world we live in today, Josh. Yeah.
Nice. So the next one that's on my heart, as you know, but from competition to organizational collaboration.
Yeah. In the past, missionaries, when they went out, they actually took a country, say it was the Congo, and they divided it into sections and had what they called comity, the Baptists in the north, the Methodists in the south, the E-Free in the west, whatever like this, kind of a thing. But there was a good reason to do that. But it kept everything separate, and now you've got competition going on between the groups and the churches and stuff like that. Well, all that is now almost flip-flopped. Now we're looking and we're seeing that people want to cooperate together. Collaboration together is really, really an interconnectedness that they want, because there's so many resources to be shared and personnel to be shared and stuff, that we have organizational connections and collaborations like never before. and thus the rise for networks and networks,
Yes.
and you take a mission, a typical mission, Avant or whatever, and they might join 6, 7, 10 different networks just to be able to network into the specialty that network would have. I lead a network, the Alliance for the Unreached, and therefore groups join in because they want to focus on that. And there's hundreds, literally hundreds of networks in missions. Probably 300 of them could be named. And so there's a lot of places to collaborate, and groups are finding that is very, very beneficial to, instead of compete, to collaborate with each other.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, well, we're quickly running out of time, but I want to make sure that we get these last two in there. So, the explosion of short-term missions, how has that impacted, maybe even long-term missions today?
Well, Josh, when I began back in 1970s, there was very, very little short term. It was just starting to grow. But now, before COVID hit, 2.5 million Americans would go on short term trips every year. Imagine that. And basically, it became this: anybody going anywhere at any time to do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's about what short-term missions has turned into be. And obviously some have been good, some aren't so good. There's been disasters, been some really good stuff and stuff. But what we see is the typical person in a pew. If they want to take a missions trip, their church might support them. Off they go to a country they've never been before, and they'll go and do that. And when it's done correctly, if it supplements long-term missions, if it supplements and helps out, that's the best way to utilize short-term missions. And like you said, this is a whole topic that
it's another 26 minutes.
There's a lot of stuff. Yeah,
there's positives. There's positives. There's negatives. There's nuances to it. So maybe we'll tackle that one first next time. So
when I was a professor at Moody Bible Institute for 8 years. Every year I would take student trips overseas on short-term missions. So, I mean, that's just one example, and you probably do the same. So we just, it's just the way it is, Josh. So there's a lot of positives and negatives, but it's a reality. It's there, and it can be a really good thing.
Yes, very much, very much. So, all right, our last one, definitely incredibly relevant for, the year and a half that we're coming out of here with COVID. But cyber missions, what is that?
Yeah, Josh, there are people now that just do missions from, say, the computer in their bedroom at 3 o'clock in the morning. They're talking with people over in India or Thailand or Malaysia or something like this, and conducting discipleship classes and doing evangelistic outreach. It's just because of people being online all around the world. Hey, you meet them there. You meet them there. You don't have to physically be present. And so there's a whole network. We talked about collaboration of missionaries that network together for cyber missions and talk about the way to do it correctly and just all kinds of connections there. And so cyber missions, is really, really big. And so what we've seen the last 40 years is this: from the residential missionary only to the mixture of now short-term missions supplementing to now the mixture of cyber missions with it. And so we got three streams of ways of doing mission today, especially the cyber one. It's just growing and continuing to grow and being very influential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, one question in that. And we'll have to keep it short, unfortunately. We're out of time. But can cyber missions replace the local church?
Never.
Okay.
It always takes flesh and blood to be effectively discipling other people. You cannot, it can supplement, but it will never supplant it. And we need to remember that they need to go hand in hand.
Yeah. So it's a both and, absolutely. So
it is.
All right. Well, we are out of time. Thank you, Dr. Newell. Appreciate you joining us today. Yeah, like we've said, each one of these has incredible depth to it, and hopefully we'll be able to schedule some more conversations, and we can go deeper into some of them. So yeah, maybe I'll get some If you're listening, hey, if you're listening to this and you're a pastor, you're a church leader, and one of these is something specific that you're like, hey, I really want to know more about this one, let me know. Email us, give us a phone call here at Calvary, respond, and would love to hear from you, and we will put that together. So, all right. So God bless everyone. Thank you, and have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Calvary Conversations, a service of Calvary University in Kansas City, Missouri. We invite you to participate in the conversation by contacting us through the Calvary University website, calvary.edu, or by calling us at 816-322-0110. Join us again next week for another Calvary Conversation.